So I am going to introduce Kristin. Where'd she go? Kristin.
Hi everyone, I'm pretty loud. I'm an ex-teacher myself, so I don't actually even need a microphone, but I'm going to go ahead and stand up here and talk to you for a minute. My name is Kristin Carroll. I'm Associate Educator at the Florida Holocaust Museum. We're located in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'll be talking a little bit later about our museum, about our resources, of course about the importance of Holocaust education. But first I want to introduce one of our speakers. He is a second generation speaker, meaning he is a child of Holocaust survivors. And so he's going to tell you the story of his parents. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up Heuman.
Good evening, everybody. Awesome to be here to teach the teachers, to teach our future. And that's how, because we have to know what history is all about. When I first walked in here, I saw these photographs, and I only saw them first time after a long time, just a couple days ago, and I never thought it was that small. That small. I'll introduce, if you haven't figured out, that's me in the middle. And my father, Walter, my mother, Ruth, and my two younger sisters, identical twins. Double trouble growing up. I grew up like, if I did something wrong, I had a consequence. When they did something wrong, I had the consequence. That I believe one could say, I think I was like 6 or 7 years old there, and these are my parents, and shortly before they passed. So it was sort of stunning as I shared with a few others walking in. I said, all of a sudden, wow, something this big to see it versus a small photograph. But thank you for being here. The Holocaust. Systematic and state-sponsored persecution of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its allies and collaborators between 1933 and 1945. State-sponsored, systematic persecution. Holocaust survivors include former inmates of ghettos, concentration camps and other camps, refugees, partisans, and people in hiding. For me, both of my parents, mom and dad, they were 2 of 5 survivors of my family. The other 2 were an uncle and aunt, a brother of my father and his wife, and 1 grandparent. And admittedly, it wasn't until, I believe, almost a year ago, we saw a movie called Traces. Wonderful, wonderful movie that second generation like me, being a second generation Holocaust survivor. And one fact came out that I never realized, even in my tender age, is that I never had a grandmother. I never had a grandmother, never had a shoulder in apple pie, whatever the case is. Little small things make it very important. Significant events. Invariably, I'm going to assume we all know this little bit of history, but I'll review it here. World War I ends in 1918. Treaty of Versailles, Germany is forced to take full responsibility for the war. They had to pay reparations. They lost territory, and Germany is forced, as I just said, to pay reparations. They could not have an army, could not build munitions or anything else of that nature. Then the book My Struggle, Mein Kampf, done by Adolf Hitler. His so-called autobiography, the beginning of the Nazi Party. The Great Depression happened, 1929. A lot of things had a cause effect in this wonderful country, but it also went around the world. A lot of disenchanted people came along. And a lot of people wanted to listen to somebody that could tell them how and what to do. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, I should say, was, as it says here, appointed chancellor. All the positions he held, he was never elected to any position. He was always appointed. He was the loudest voice in the room, for the lack of a better term, and we know from history what the result is. The largest expanse of the Nazi Empire, I will refer to it. Of course, you see where Germany is in the darker maroon color. You also have to look at Think about North Africa, from Morocco to Egypt, was all occupied. Fortunately, as I say, I'm a docent at the museum. I say, fortunately, the Nazi Empire, Nazis did not last longer like the Holy Roman Empire, which would be very similar. Hitler, obviously, it is very pervasive when you take a look at a graphic of this nature. Anti-Semitism, anti-anything relative to that is egregious to me. Anti-Semitism means prejudice against or hatred of Jews. For me, when I was in middle school and high school, I was a victim of physical and mental anti-Semitism on me. In a small town I grew up in western New York. My son, who went to a Hillsborough County school, high school, endured a terrible incident because of his faith. 3 different graphics you see up here. One that I'm pointing to right here, the Pearl of the Jews in French. I use this. This is one of our posters. For those of you that have been to our museum will know what that is. And then I ask anybody that I'm being a docent for. They could be 5th graders, they could be senior citizens, or anybody in between. What does this mean? And very few people, very, very, very few people are brave enough to say, it's a Jewish person grabbing and controlling the world and killing people. Very horrible. And this is just one small example of what we have at our museum. Another form of anti-Semitism is relatively recent. These black and white photos are, now I think it was about 12 or 15 years ago, was an exhibit we had at our museum. And by the way, our museum is not a religious museum, as Kristin will share with you. We're non-sectarian. Not sure if the pointer's going to work here. But when we look at this, is this wall right here, and this is the blow up. Those are gravestones from Jewish cemeteries in Poland. 12 to 15 years ago, I can't remember the exact date. And to me, the irony of this picture, or maybe paradox of this picture, is it is in the foreground of a place of worship. To me, very powerful, very powerful. Again, another example of what we have in rotating exhibits. Here we have Mazavot, a Jewish headstone from a cemetery, used as a grinding wheel to sharpen knives. Judaism is not a culture, it's not a nationality, it's not a race, it's a religion. And how many times do we hyphenate words, whatever they may be, without thinking about the context of what we're trying to say? And I will have another slide that will bring that out very poignantly. The photograph you see there is one of the newer photographs in our PowerPoint. It is me being bar mitzvahed, 13 years old, in a small synagogue in Batavia, New York, south of Rochester, where one of the reasons I'm down here is they have all this white stuff called snow. Been down here over 40 years now. But yeah, I was 13 there. He was a blind rabbi, Rabbi Harry J. Brevis. There was a state school for the blind in Batavia, New York. And one of his renowned accomplishments is that he wrote the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, in Braille Hebrew. That was his legacy. I'm so proud to have been one of his bar mitzvahs. And how proud my parents were. Their first child, 14 years after the war ended. I was born in June of 1946, so you can do some quick arithmetic to know how young I am. Power of choice. Every morning, anytime during the day, everyone has, no matter what their age grouping might be. You could be an upstander, bystander, perpetrator, or victim. And for me, I've always been an upstander. From high school, definitely through college at the proverbial 60s. I graduated from college in 69. I was always one to stand in the front and speak for people that, for whatever their reasons, did not want to speak. I never got in trouble that I know of. I never saw a courthouse as a result of that, but I did my thing. So therefore, by definition, I don't feel I was a bystander. As a perpetrator, yes, I have two younger sisters, as I shared with you. Yes, I was a perpetrator. I would tease them, just natural right of being the big brother. And as a victim, as I shared with you moments ago, I was a victim of physical and mental anti-Semitism on me. Didn't change my world, but interesting enough, it did not really come out until later years of my life that some of the impacts may have. And now the biggest impact is I'm doing what I'm doing ever since our Holocaust Museum started many decades ago. Perspective of my family, those who survived. My grandfather was from East Prussia, and he grew up at a time when there were large families, there were agrarian families, to say the least, and there were so many children at that time that his parents, one of family stories, his parents bartered him for a cow so they could have milk for the rest of the children. And I have, and the museum does not have that. They have most everything else, but I have that certificate in script German with the wax seal on it, on his adoption papers. But he fought in World War I also, and I'll tell a little bit more about his story. My father from Cologne, Germany, and my mother from Berlin, Germany. The significance there is that in 1940, April 18th of 1940, they got married in Berlin, Germany, despite the craziness that was going on. And they were together for a few years and then separated for more years. And I'll show you the camps that they were eventually liberated from. My uncle and aunt went to Shanghai, a so-called, what we refer to today as sanctuary city at that time. They left after what is known as Kristallnacht, and I'll share that in a few moments. And they ended up survived even the Japanese takeover, because China was taken over by the Japanese. The little backstory that people sometimes don't realize is that the Americans had to fight through the various ways to beat the Japanese, and a lot of refugees there unfortunately perished. My uncle and aunt did not. Family photos, I have none. No family photos until after my parents were liberated. One of the fates of war. Everything I know about my family is vicarious. It's just a very unfortunate, scenario, but it's real. You just learn to live with it. And therefore, for me, and as my sweetheart Lourdes, I should say, sitting right there, and Kristin and others that know me, family is very important. You can have your visuals, on that, and appreciate all that. So Kristallnacht, Night of the Broken Glass. Very fateful time where the Nazis began to flex their muscles, for lack of a better term. What we don't see in the writing up there is that over 600 synagogues were burned to the ground throughout Germany and other areas. And then the Nazis had the chutzpah to then tax every Jewish community for the cleanup of their burned out synagogues. Kristallnacht was fateful for my family also, because my mother's father, my grandfather, grandpa, he lost his businesses in Berlin at that time, and he had to emigrate to Cuba, as the case is, and I'll get into that in a few moments. It was a time of disbelief that this could happen, but it did happen. It's part of world history. Arbeit macht frei. you or all of you have seen that expression. Jews, more often than not, were the ones who prepared, folded together those signs. And there's civil disobedience in that sign. And it's in the inset, the B. Usually the big hoop is at the bottom and the small hoop is at the bottom. Civil disobedience. You know, thumb in your eye type of scenario. The Nazis, to the best of my knowledge, never picked that up. Never were intelligent or smart enough to see that. My mother was liberated from Auschwitz. She was less about 90 pounds. She was born in 1918. You can do the arithmetic. Skin and bones. But she survived in guts and faith. She was interned in other camps. My father was liberated from Dachau, another brutal camp. Auschwitz was one of the 6 killing centers. One of the 6 killing centers that the Nazis tried to burn to the ground when they knew that they were going to lose the war. And the reality is they were not able to succeed with that, so we do have that history to look at. The size you can see from the aerial photographs, quite large, immense. Auschwitz is a city in southwest Poland, and Dachau is a northwestern suburban city of Munich, Germany, mentioned. That's my mother's suitcase in Auschwitz. The Polish government is not enthralled to let things like this leave their country, albeit I was just going to give it to the museum. And you can see the European birth dates there. They put the day, the month, and then the year. And this came to my sister's attention, my attention, through a mensch, a wonderful person about 8-10 years ago or so, has taken upon himself to get the names off of these suitcases, and they rotate these piles of suitcases. And he searched us on the internet and sent this picture to us. There are good people out there. There's many of us, everyone in this room. A forgotten group of people as a result of most any war are the liberators. And we have a part of our museum that we show that. You can see the army patches here. I note the 36th Infantry Division there because that's the infantry division that liberated my father from that portion of Dachau. Dachau was so immense, it took more than one military division to do it. The arrowhead represents Oklahoma, and the T for Texas, so it was a reserve army division from Oklahoma and Texas. It is functional today still as a reserve division in the U.S. Army. And this is just illustrative of those of people that know sizes of divisions can be 10, 12,000, maybe up to 20,000 a division. This is just infantry of the U.S. Army. Give you a perspective of the size of the military force. So the war ends, and my parents found each other, which is a whole serendipity story. I'm planting a seed here. And Auschwitz being over here, Kempten and Dachau being here in Munich. This is a displaced persons camp. It's an existing warehouse. It was a warehouse that the military, U.S. military, was in the U.S. military zone in southwest Germany. And they made these into displaced persons camps. This is where people that have some level of geographic commonality, maybe language commonality, that people went through. There were hundreds of them throughout Germany. And the last one closed in 1952. So when my family closed in 1952, it took that long for people to find a home again. And of course, you see the picture of my parents and me. I was born here. I'm a naturalized citizen. And per our Constitution, because we're hearing a lot about that now, per the Constitution, one of the best things for me personally, I can never be president of the United States. Not that I would want to. But it was a very, very happy time. My parents found each other, got healthy all the way around, and about a year later, I was born. This is my birth certificate. Registration record, AEF, Allied Expeditionary Forces, DP, Displaced Persons Camp. This was prepared by some E2 or E3 in the U.S. Army, in all innocence. And I spoke earlier about how we sometimes hyphenate words. So yes, when he notes in here that I'm a Jew, yes, I'm proud of it. But when it comes to my nationality, he put me down as a German Jew. I could be from South Africa, I could be from France, I could be from the United States. What difference does it make what country relative to the religion? And how we sometimes unwittingly, without malice, will hyphenate words and do things of that nature. We immigrated to this country when I was less than a year old on the SS Ernie Pyle. He was a war correspondent. The manifest is listed there with my parents' name and my name. My grandfather left Germany, as I shared with you earlier, after Kristallnacht, went to Cuba. He was a jeweler, a master jeweler. And after a couple of years, he ended up in New Haven, Connecticut. And so I have his immigration papers too. Whenever you go back to Ellis Island, you can see our three names, really our four names there. This violin is my father's violin. That's on exhibit, permanent. It's owned by the Florida Holocaust Museum. Everything except one book that I have is now owned by the Florida Holocaust Museum. All of our original immigration papers written on onion skin paper. Some of you may remember that. You know, a lot of paper you can get versus, the paper we buy today in an inch, let's say. So my father played violin to ford his way through college and medical college. He graduated in 1939 from the University of Cologne Medical College. That was one of the last classes, I believe, in Germany that they allowed people that were of the Jewish faith to even go to medical school. So if you were like a third-year med student at that time, you're SOL. Time to continue. That violin was destroyed as a result of the Allied war effort. But my father found this violin after he was liberated from Dachau. And he played that violin and he went to Kempten, Germany, beautiful city in southwest Germany, where the DP camp was. And to assuage his feelings, not knowing if his wife was alive, my mother, or other members of the family were alive, that immigrated with us to the United States. We came here to this country with me in the baby carriage, the violin, a wood trunk, a straw trunk, and $14. And yes, my father had a profession. I had to study again for almost 3 years, and he finally set up a medical practice as a country doctor, old-fashioned Marcus Welby type of doctor in Western New York, where he was the only physician in about 20 miles. And I remember growing up, listening to him and watching him in a small town gazebo on various Sundays playing with the community orchestra. So this is where they went. New Haven, Connecticut, where my grandfather went. It was fortunate. He became our sponsor. At that time, we had everyone coming had to have a sponsor. And Dad studied in Danbury. And every couple weekends, he took a bus home, and so he could be with Mom and myself. We ended up in south of Rochester, New York, where the big black dot is. We grew up in a very small town where rush hour was, when the school buses went underneath the yellow flashing light. K through 12 had less than 1,000 kids. I learned a lot of agricultural practices, to say the least. I was, unique and special upbringing. So why did my parents go to such a small town? Nearest hospital, 20 miles, synagogue, 20 miles, hospital, 20 miles, pharmacy, 20 miles, etc. They did not want to go to a big city again. They were from Berlin, Cologne, major cultural, academic, world capitals, financial capitals, etc. They were scared. Did not want it, as many other Jewish families. Most people went to large cities. Most people did. They congregated in New York, in Cape Town, South Africa, or Sydney, Australia, San Francisco, etc. But my parents, that's one of the reasons they purposely did that. And it just allowed me to have a very unique upbringing. But the future goes on. I have two wonderful children, Rebecca, right there, and the young man, second from the right there, is my son Joshua, Rebecca and Joshua. My son had the three boys, and my daughter had the three girls, just the way the biology worked out. On that, admittedly, my son remarried, so the young man there is Keaton, charm of our life right now, 5 years old. About 2-3 weeks ago, first great-grandson was born. Colton, Stetson, Holland, they live in Texas, what can I say? And she's the mother, Shelby. This is her younger sister by 3.5 years. She got envious or jealous, whatever, and she's gonna have a daughter in about 3 weeks. The challenge she's going to have, Skylar's going to have, is that she's a senior in college right now at St. Angelo State, but the family there is totally supportive. This is very important because the Nazis did not succeed. If we look at the dates, if I remember this, since the end of World War II in 1945, it took 75 years for the world population, the world Jewish population, to be the same as it was in 1933. And we've succeeded. My children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren now are proof of that. Generations after. This is a small group of people. Well, second generation and generations after, we meet on a monthly basis, weather permitting. And just to talk, to chat, how are things going with the family. Some members of our second generation, their parents, well, all their parents were survivors, but two of them in particular, they're still alive, that I know of. Lourdes and I know that they belong to our synagogue in St. Petersburg. One is 101 years old, Helen, and the other one's 99 years old, Mary. And they're sort of, Helen more married older, the two, during religious services, sometimes they're like Jack in the Box. You just can't keep them down. They're just up and down, up and down. The will to live. The will to live. So at the end of the day, when we go to Publix or wherever you buy your eggs, you have a choice of 3 colored eggs. Dark brown, light brown, or white. There might be a cost differential or preference or whatever the case is, but there's something very common to these 3 eggs. We're all the same inside, regardless who we are or what our background is. We're all the same inside. We have feelings, we have a soul, we have family, we have so many things. Some words, some phrases that I have pulled from various readings that I have done. Words matter, and choosing them carefully can mean the difference between diatribe and discourse. Be the smartest voice in the room, not the loudest. If we lose tolerance, we lose our freedom. Few are guilty, but all are responsible. I think Elie Wiesel was the one who said said that. And I believe Kristi's going to talk more about Ellie Wiesel coming up. And do I take questions now or after you? Yeah. Okay. I'm an open book for those people that know me. Ask away, if you wish.
You had mentioned your father, you were going to go the story of your father reconnecting somehow with your mother.
Yes.
So I was curious.
Oh, you heard that, didn't you?
Happened.
Yeah, well, the story is, and one of the, Charles at our museum, you always make sure I tell that story when I'm a docent also, is that southwest Poland is where Auschwitz is. You know your geography, and Munich, Germany is in southwest Germany. So my mother was liberated first. Auschwitz was one of the large camps that was liberated mainly by the Russians at that time. They were our allies during that era. But she did not know who else was alive, but Dad was liberated many weeks later. And the story is that Dad's name was on the list with the International Red Cross, with Highest Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, JDF, Joint Distribution Fund, many lists, because the Americans did stuff like that. The Russians did not do anything. So eventually Mom knew Dad was alive, but Dad did not know Mom was alive. So Mom and a few other ladies trekked through bombed out Europe, from southwest Poland to southern Germany, and they come to the gate. It was all the guards were there, the MPs were guarding this displaced persons camp. You saw the warehouse, that's still there. I took those photos. Because the guards were there, because all of a sudden the people in the community were like the three monkeys. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. The neighbors wanted to come in. This is city folk wanted clean linen, good food, good medical care, etc., etc. So they had to filter the people, check the people out. Mom in broken English said that, here Dr. Heuman, in German, we're very formal. Mr. Dr. Heuman is here at the hospital, working in the hospital and whatnot. And a lot of back and forth. And it just so happened that Marion Badrian, the nurse that was at their wedding in 1940, was also at that DP hospital on a smoke break, bless her heart, overheard my mother's voice in Arrested Serendipity. And I'm sure there's many others, similar stories, that us second generation, I know there are, because I've heard how people found each other. But sometimes, from second generation or third generation, there was only one survivor, or one refugee type of scenario. Other questions, please? Ask away. Anything curious?
Do you know how many living survivors there are?
I think in the world today, there's from 200 to 250,000. And there's a lot of support groups out there. One of the largest is known as Gulf Coast Jewish Federation, I believe, where they have social services in about 40 of the 67 state counties. Yeah, it's just do the arithmetic. And those two ladies I mentioned, they were child survivors. Again, do the arithmetic. Type of scenario, and yet they had, and continue, they have the will to live. Thank you, great question. Anybody else? Please? Sort of like a classroom, I'm trying to pull things out.
Awfully quiet.
Did you see your mom and dad reflect on their experience in the war much?
They reflected very late in their life. It was, and thank you, very good question on that too. That when Adolf Eichmann was caught in Argentina in June of 1960, that was way before our digital era, but we had Life magazine, Look magazine, McCall's, all things of that nature. That was the first time that I recollect my parents sitting down with me and my sisters and I, and give us a little bit of their story. because they knew we would see it in the magazines. They did not, I know things were different. Our upbringing was very particular, focused in a very German style of upbringing, separate from all of us being part of the Clean Plate Society. We knew there was an accent. We knew they, discussed or argued a lot. That's how I learned German. I was just trying to pick up bits and pieces type of scenario. It's interesting how you can learn the language. Their lifestyle was different. Concept of respect and courtesy was paramount. In that, and it was that was the first time I was 14 years old. My sisters were 9. They didn't do it. If we were in a big city, I'm sure if we were in Rochester, New York City, for sure, we probably would have known that much sooner in our lives. Also, very clean, extra clean. My mother was much more so than my father. By the way, the office was attached to the house, if you can just visualize the Marcus Welby TV show. When they went away, I stayed at the house. Mom would saran wrap all the dishes, pots and pans, silverware that I could not use. Okay. My sisters had to wear sometimes double gloves. The water was so hot when they washed dishes. It was a very unique upbringing, but very good in a way too. Yes, sir.
Do your children know everything?
My daughter knows more than my son, because has been a little more inquisitive on that. Unfortunately, they're not as active in Judaism or in wanting to know more about the Holocaust. I wish they did. It's not something I feel that I can force or should force them. They have to come out themselves and seek that. I know of other families where their children are more proactive, but it's just part of the reality of living in this wonderful country at times. You just have to accept that, which is not comfortable for me sometimes, but it's their lives. They'll have to figure that out themselves. But I'm always so elated when school groups come to our wonderful museum, or I get to go to speak to school groups. I've been speaking for over 25 years now to schools throughout Hillsborough County and Pasco County, Pinellas County, Manatee County, whoever wants to listen. Rotary clubs and book clubs and church groups and whatever, is just trying to get the information out there. People then have a choice to make their own decisions. Thank you, great question. Yes, ma'am.
Have you traveled back to
Yes.
Germany? And have you taken your family or your parents?
The way it worked out, I wish I could have gone with my parents. There was opportunities, but it was not to be had without going into much detail. On that, I was hoping to go with my father. My mother would never, for obvious reasons, go back to Germany. She really held a grudge. My father was a little more open about it, let's say. And I have not traveled with my kids there yet, but I've been there. In Auschwitz, Dachau, a lot of other camps. And it's great history. Everyone should have that opportunity. During the digital era we're in right now, we can do that digitally as well as physically being there. But physically being there, it's like having Thanksgiving dinner by Zoom. There's something about being in the presence. Sorry?
The gravitas.
Yeah. It's I know other families have done that a lot, but it just wasn't part of our scenario. Thank you. First time I've ever had that question. Other thoughts or questions, please, at this time? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Again, so my name is Carroll. I'm Associate Educator at the Florida Holocaust Museum. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about Holocaust education, teaching the Holocaust to students, and just some of the resources that we can provide, and also some helpful tips for you teachers. Because it's a hard topic to broach. It's hard to know how much is too much for this age group. How do I even start talking about such a horrific incident in so many people's lives? And how do I tell the story and tell it in its entirety and in its truth without disengaging people because of those horrors? So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So again, this is the Florida Holocaust Museum. We have a very specific mission, okay? And our mission is to honor the millions that suffered, were murdered by the Nazi regime and their persecutors, but it doesn't just stop there. Our mission is really twofold. It's to keep it from happening again. It's to show the inherent worth of all peoples, of all cultures, of all groups, and to really encourage teaching that to students, to have that pass along to the next generation. Really quickly, the museum is currently closed. We are closed until early next year. We're closed for some really wonderful renovation. We have some new exhibits coming up that I'm going to give you a little sneak preview about and talk to you about, because it's really exciting what's happening at the museum. So the Florida Holocaust Museum is going to have a Danish rescue boat. Its name is Thor. It is a very big boat. This is not like it is as big as this room, okay? So we actually had to expand out into the alley to make space for this boat. But raise your hand if you know about the Danish rescue. The Danish rescue was a really unusual event. I guess, anybody read Number the Stars or heard of Number the Stars? Okay. So the Danish rescue was not done by the Danish government, but as the Nazis were taking over space, as they took over the Netherlands, basically people got a heads up, hey, they're coming. And the civilians, people, just common people, bound together and they started their own rescue operation. And so they started taking Jews that they knew were Jews, and they started hiding them in fishing boats and then bringing them off and out of Nazi territory. So this was not a government state-funded operation. This was people seeing people for who they are. And so we were able to, through an incredible donation of a woman that it was her parents. She's pretty sure this is what saved her parents' life. This is why she existed, was because of this boat, and now this gets to be in our museum and shown. We also are having Elie Wiesel, the author of Night, who is a Holocaust survivor himself. He's probably one of the most famous Holocaust survivors. He's written several books. He has won a Nobel Peace Prize because of his humanitarian work. And so his family has donated his entire collection, including his Nobel Peace Prize, his desk, all of it, to our museum. He worked really hard with the Florida Holocaust Museum, because the Florida Holocaust Museum is a little bit unique, right? Because you sit there and you're like, well, why didn't they give it to the DC Museum, right? The DC Museum's so big, all of these things. The Florida Holocaust Museum was established by survivors. It is a very specific and very intentional mission because it was created by survivors. And survivors and their children, their grandchildren, are really the core of the museum. They help to keep that message going forever and ever and ever, hopefully. So we're going to have both of these exhibits coming in the museum, but again, we have to really build out to have room for that, because St. Pete does not have a ton of extra room. And we are in downtown St. Pete, which is even less. So we're doing our best to get out and get it done. So early next year, we will have these in our museum. I know Harry already gave you the definition, and I know that many of you guys already know the definition. However, I am a former teacher. So I taught a lot of different classes, but one of those classes was specifically Holocaust history honors. And there's a really important thing about this definition. And it's something that I found really helpful once I figured it out, because it is core definition. Right, this is a 5th grade standard that continues all the way through 12th grade, through department, through Florida State, standards. Break this down. Kids don't understand it. So really just, and it's interesting because as you're going with them and as you're talking about it with them, if you break out certain things like, if you were to say, you read them the definition. The Holocaust was a systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators, its allies between 1933 and 1945. Eyes glaze over. They're done. And then you say, let's break down this definition. Systematic. That's a big word. Sounds like the word system. When you hear the word system, what do you think of?
Systems of the body.
Systems of the body, okay? When you hear the word system, what do you think of?
Something that continues.
Something that continues, all right? That's great. What do you think of? System. Manufacturing. What do you think of? What do you think of?
Like, this is like the way things happen.
The way things have processes, okay?
Something that works.
Something that works, okay? So everything that you're saying is all true, right? These are all systems. They're all very organized. They're all very clear-cut. It's one thing after another. It's very methodical, right? Okay, and then when you hear state-sponsored, state kids, all they know is the 50 states. So you just have to tell them, when we say state, we're talking about a government, actually. It can be a country. And then you say, but what about the word sponsor? What is the word sponsor? Every kid, I'll tell you right now, knows what a sponsor is. And they'll tell you it means funding, it means money. And so then when you put it back together, systematic, organized, clearly methodical, it's the same thing every time. Sponsored, funded by the government, then it makes more sense to kids. I really, really want to strongly encourage you guys break that down for them, because I found it to be really, really helpful when you're teaching the Holocaust, for them to understand the breadth of it. And then to understand Holocaust survivors and what they include. And that's the reason why we always include this slide and include that definition. Because there is a huge perspective of there's a range of experiences with a Holocaust survivor. Many of them are refugees. Many of them were in camps. Many of them were both refugees and in camps. There is an incredible perspective. There are many that fought back. There are some that hid, actually, like Anne Frank, hiding in an attic. There are some that hid in plain sight, right, where they hid their identity. The reason why it's important to note that is because each one of those perspectives is valuable. When you start talking about 6 million people, it's hard to understand. But when you start breaking it down into individual stories, into individual survivors and their experiences, then it becomes more real. It becomes more of a tangible and understandable experience. So I'm not going to talk about this very much, but you guys already know this, right? In 1994, the state of Florida made this standards. So Holocaust standards are 5th grade through 12th grade. And they even added on to that in 2020. They've even added on to it more recently and added other standards to it. So these are things that need to be taught in classes, first of all, because it is a story that needs to continue going no matter what. But it's also part of our own legislation and what we're supposed to do as teachers and what we're supposed to be teaching. But just because we're supposed to, why do we? There's a really good reason why we should be teaching Holocaust education, and it is not just because we have to. Students that have, the ADL worked with the USC Shoah Foundation, and they did a bunch of college surveys, and they really accrued some data because they wanted to talk to people and see the difference between students that had Holocaust education when they were young and students that didn't. And what they found was actually really shocking. They found things like more likely to challenge intolerant behavior. People more likely to say, that's not okay, you can't do that. More likely to challenge incorrect or biased information, and we are just living in a world of misinformation. Holocaust education allows students the foundation to understand that speaking up matters, being educated matters. 50% less likely to do nothing in a bullying scenario. Now, even when we talk about that, it is important to understand that it's not easy. I'm going to go back to that in a minute. Harry already talked about the power of choice. I really liked to use this with my students specifically and to use these categories. It does simplify the idea of that people are a category, right? However, you can make it more complicated. When you're talking about victims, perpetrators, bystanders, and upstanders, it's really helpful as you're talking about it to let people know that they don't have to stay in one category. There's a lot of examples in history about people moving throughout categories. One of the examples that I would use a lot, just because it was such a staggering back and forth, was Schindler, right? Many people have seen Schindler's List. Guys, he was a perpetrator, 100%. He was a war profiteer, profiting off of slave labor of Jews. And then he got to know them. He changed his perspective. And within changing his perspective, he changed his category. And he ended up saving, I think it's like 1,200 Jews. So he went from being someone that he was part of the Nazi party. And then he saved them. So again, these are tools that you can use to sort of help your students really understand the complexities of it. And the reason why that's important is because it's not easy to do. Teaching the Holocaust is teaching about the Holocaust. I remember my first day walking into a Holocaust history class, and I thought, oh, this is not going to go well. Like, I don't even know how to start. I know what it was, I know what happened, and I'm looking at all of these students, and I'm like, how do I impress upon them the seriousness and the severity of this situation without just dumping on them? But then, the wonderful thing is actually when I was a teacher, I started working with the Florida Holocaust Museum. And they gave me help, and they gave me guidelines, and they gave me tools that I needed, and so I felt more confident. I want to go over some of these guidelines because these sort of became a foundation of how I taught the Holocaust. The first one is defining the Holocaust and really breaking down those terms and having them understand it. Because if they can really understand each part of what the Holocaust was in its literal meaning, it's easier for them to then talk about the more complex ideas. Making sure that I do not teach that it was inevitable, that I don't imply it somehow, that I don't let cynicism come in there and just be like, oh, that I make sure that I let people know these were choices. People made choices, individuals made choices, groups made choices, and that's why this happened. But if they made choices that made it happen, then they can make choices to make it not happen. Avoiding simple answers. I know I literally just told you to make categories for people, so, kind of contradicting myself. However, kids are gonna have really hard questions. And your job is to say, I don't know. I don't know why that person chose to do that. What do you think? I don't know. And let them sit in that, because that is the reality. Striving for precision of language, that's really important. Talking specifically about, if you're talking about the Nazi regime, you're not talking about all Germans, right? The Nazi regime was very specific, right? Making sure that you are using vernacular that is accurate to what you are talking about. Striving for a balance in perspective. You want to make sure that you're telling the whole story of the Holocaust. I gave you a whole list of all the different people of what makes a survivor. Telling all of their perspectives, not just one. Not just a camp story, or not just a refugee story. Avoiding comparisons of pain. Pain is pain is pain. And it does not matter if you were in a camp. It does not matter if you were a refugee. You should never, ever have comparisons of pain, and you should really encourage your students not to compare pain. Not to compare it within the Holocaust, and not to compare it without it, right? Different genocides, we should not be comparing the pain between genocides or anything like that. Yes?
I have a question. So, the word Holocaust, and
Yes.
I know what it represents as an adult. It's a strange word for people who never used it and what happened, but how would you explain that word? How it says define the term Holocaust, which nobody would understand, but it's just iteration. Also, how specifically were the Jews selected to be the one that's persecuted, which is also another word that's not understandable.
Yeah.
To most persecution, I know what it means, but it's not a word we use so much.
Right.
And it doesn't sound like somebody's getting punched in the face and say, like, we blow them off. So that's a word I wanted to know. Why? I've read a bunch of things. Why were the Jews selected to get us to this point? And I know there's a number of reasons, but I don't really know why. If you're gonna talk and teach people about why this happened, but why? Because it's not like the Jewish white people look so different than anybody else.
You're absolutely right.
So
Yeah.
I'm just curious about how you arrive at the why, because it doesn't matter if we don't know that there are no distinctive skin color or anything like that that suggest why we would select these people.
Okay.
So
So both of those are great questions. I'm going to separate them, and then I'll go ahead and answer them. So the word Holocaust actually comes from the Greek words. meaning Holocaust, which means great fire, okay? So it's actually talking about a great fire and a cataclysmic fire. When we talk about the Holocaust, it is literally the Holocaust, and H is capitalized. It was a word, it was a term that was coined to reference the Shoah. It's a term that was kind of called upon and adopted by the Jewish people to come to grips with what happened during the Holocaust. So that's how that word itself was used and how it sort of got in there. But you asked a really good question, and why the Jews? So oftentimes anti-Semitism is referenced as the oldest hatred. Okay? I don't know if anybody's ever heard that term. Anti-Semitism has a very, very long history within the very actual origins of the religion of Judaism. The origins of the religion of Judaism, as many of you know, because you're already mostly history teachers, right? We're talking early civilizations. But we're also talking, they were the only monotheistic religion around. Everybody else was a polytheistic religion, believing in many gods. They're the only ones that believed in one. And not only were the other religions polytheistic, believing in many gods, they were also theocracies. So these many gods, many of those gods were their kings. And then here comes a people group saying, by the way, there's only one God and you're not it. It was a direct challenge for power. Now, this is not the only reason why, but when we're talking about the oldest hatred, we're talking about a hatred that was very, very early on in its origins and only became worse and worse and worse, because as that sort of hatred stemmed and just kind of grew, there was a lot of things throughout history. It didn't start with the Holocaust. In fact, there were many other pogroms or violent attacks against Jews all throughout history. Some of them are even talked about in movies, right? Prince of Egypt, right? The one with Moses, and they're talking about, I mean, that's a Jewish pogrom. So when we're talking about this is something that was continual over and over and over and happened. Jews became scapegoats for anything that was going wrong, right? And so anytime in civilization that something is going wrong, what you see is there's a need to point fingers. And Jews, because there was already this deep-seated, they're different than me, just their customs were different. They didn't look different. They didn't talk. I mean, sometimes they did. They often, later on, would develop their own kind of, Yiddish. But it perpetuated all throughout history in multiple different avenues. In fact, within that history itself, there's moments where it's not as bad, and then it flares back up again. And there's moments where it's not as bad, but it's still there, and it's still there with small rhetoric, right? Just little microaggressions, things like that then start growing into aggressions, that then start growing into very large aggressions. And so we see all throughout history the Black Plague over and over and over again. If this is something that you're like, I don't really know how to teach this to my kids, on the Florida Holocaust Museum's website, we actually have curriculum that was just created and is just now on there. It has DBQs specifically that go over the timeline of anti-Semitism that can help teach just kind of how it happened and how it started and how it kept perpetuating over and over and over again. until it would grow into the most extreme form of anti-Semitism, which is the Holocaust. I mean, the term anti-Semitism is actually anti-Jew anyway, because it's saying that Jews are Semites. That's what it literally is. It's the idea of the Semite race. It's not a race. But it was created, it was coined, it was termed in the late 1800s during the times of eugenics. So again, I can sort of help reach you to that. It's one of those things that once you learn and once you start like really going into, you can help do it. There's a wonderful video on the USHMM. It's a 12-minute video. It's part of that lesson plan. It really helps not simplify it, but put it in a more understandable way for students. If that helps. Does that answer your question at all?
I have 1,000 of them, but it's good.
All right, thank you. All right, so we also want to make sure we don't romanticize history. As teachers, it is really, really easy for us to want to tell the upstander stories because they're more palatable. At the end of the day, you walk out with a happy feeling. It is not the majority of the experience. 2/3 of all European Jews were killed during the Holocaust. 2/3.
The entire European population?
Of Jews, yes. To put in perspective. We want to translate statistics into people. That's that thing, that 6 million number. It's a big number. Personal stories. It is one of the core beliefs of the museum is that through personal testimony, through stories, first of all, it's what kids remember. They're not going to remember the numbers, they're not going to remember the dates, they're not going to remember that, but they'll remember hearing about so-and-so. They'll remember hearing about this story of heroism or this story of horror, this story of hope. They'll remember that. That they remember. We often have teachers that actually come in, that bring their students into the museum, and they come in, and one of the first things that they say is, I remember when I came here as a kid, and I had a speaker, I had a survivor talk to me, and they can recount the story. We want to contextualize the history. We want to make sure that kids understand things like that timeline. The Holocaust didn't just happen. It didn't even just happen. Kristallnacht happened in 1938. Adolf Hitler got into power in 1933, right? There was a time period of building of legislation before more widespread violence happened. And then we want to make responsible methodological choices, right? Crossword puzzles are inappropriate. Simulation activities, we really do not want to tell students, what would you do? There is no way that any one of us could ever understand what we would do in that situation. And that goes for anything. If you are a victim, or even if you are a bystander. When you're talking about bystanders, oh, I can't believe they just let that happen. There's so many reasons why they made those choices. And you can't say that you would have done something different. And pointing a finger doesn't help anything. So again, we want to emphasize specifically primary sources. Yes?
I have students when I've taught that, when I've taught that before, we talk about the bystander situations. They're like, well, I would have done this and I would have done that. And I go, well, here's some laws that were in place, or here's what they could have been thinking, or here's what they would have been afraid of. So we talk about the different ideas that could have been going on, or the different perspectives that they might have been talking about or thinking about.
That's perfect. It's natural. It's natural to say, I would have never done this. Like, it's really, that's a normal thing to do.
I would have told people what was going on as Hitler Youth or whatever. And I'm like, well, but mom and dad needed this or that, or you needed to be fed dinner too, or
but I was afraid for my family.
Yeah.
I was afraid that you know, my family was going to be killed
Yeah.
if I spoke up. There's so many. There's such. That's why you want to talk about those variety of perspectives. So again, when you make it a connection with a real person, with a real experience, we really try and stay away from fiction. And it's not because there's not good historical fiction or anything like that. It's just because why read a made-up story when you can hear real truth? Why? There's so many incredible stories that people have done. And many of these, the survivors that wrote these stories or were helped by their children to write these stories, they did this with their own, like, that's hard. That's hard to go back and to relive these experiences. So it really becomes a good tool as a teacher to help talking about. I already talked about that. So I want to talk about really quickly, and this will be my last thing, and then I'm going to give it to Jody. And that's what the Florida Holocaust Museum can help you and help provide for you. So, almost every single one of our resources is free to you, to use. The only one that ever costs anything is if you bring your students in on a tour. And if you are a Title I school, that is waived. Okay? But the first one I want to talk about is our teaching trunks. There's a little picture right there. There's an example of a very tiny one, a small one. We send it out to your school. It is a big trunk. It is like this big, and it is full of books. Some of them have class sets. And there is a large amount of different kinds. You can do middle school, you can do high school, you can have an arts trunk, there's a genocide trunk. There's a lot of different kinds of trunks. And in fact, if it's something that we can provide for you, we can create sort of a trunk with you to go to your school, to sort of help meet your students' needs and you can have it for, a couple of months sitting in your classroom. We also have Holocaust curriculum and teachers' guides. If any of you are specifically Holocaust educators, there's more specific, like Holocaust by Bullets curriculum that is done by our own Ursula Shapinska. That is an incredible wealth of knowledge, and it specifically talks about the mobile squads of Einsatzgruppen that went throughout and killed Jews as they went into areas that didn't necessarily. These are people that didn't make it to camps because they were killed so quickly. And it really goes into it. It talks about that and it talks about those specific things. Speaking of which, we have teacher trainings. Virtual, live, all sorts of teacher trainings. We actually have a live teacher training in Largo on Wednesday the 13th. And then we also do a lot of virtual trainings, and we post those virtual trainings, and you can watch them through the museum, and you can get continuing education credits for it. We actually have one specifically on the Holocaust by Bullets that was just done with our partner in Europe, Centropa. Because we're closed, you can't come to our museum. I'm so sorry. However, we do have virtual tours. So we have our museum on a virtual format, and we can have docents like Harry lead you through a virtual tour of a museum. And through that virtual tour, they're telling your students the history of the Holocaust as they're going through the museum in your classroom.
Is there a charge for that?
There is no. The only charge is when you are in person, and if you're a Title I school, that is waived. Another one which is near and dear to my heart, that is actually what this is across generations. And that's where you can have a speaker come to your classroom, to your school, to an event like this, they come and they tell you their story. We have so many incredible speakers. Unfortunately, we don't have as many survivors anymore. As many of those survivors have unfortunately passed on. But their children and their grandchildren have taken up that torch. They will not let their parents' story, their grandparents' story fizzle out. They are going to continue telling that story. And that is also free of charge. If you can't have them come in person, we can arrange it so that they come via Zoom. And they can come into your classrooms online, just like we did in COVID. COVID all over again. We also have access to video testimonies of Holocaust survivors. And those video testimonies, you can use chunks of them, you can use large bits of them, you can kind of reach through it. But what I found is really helpful, because you can also Google, right, Holocaust survivor and look it up. What I found really helpful is this isn't some person somewhere else. This is some person that was in your city. This is some person that lived where you live. They are. It makes it more real again. It's that translating statistics into real people again. Our Speak Up, Speak Now program, which is, yes.
I'm sorry, going back to the video testimonies,
Yeah.
I read a few years ago that Steven Spielberg went and interviewed hundreds of survivors back in like the 90s, while many of them were still alive, and he has hours and hours and hours of footage.
So I'm so glad that you asked this, because yes, he did. But not only did he do that, he did something that's known as Dimensions in Testimony. It's something that's featured at our museum itself, physically. In fact, we have 4 survivors that are featured in Dimensions in Testimony. And it is the neatest thing in the world. You go in and you sit down, and it's this big screen, and it's a survivor that's sitting there with you on this screen. And it's just a video of them, just like a screensaver. You go up to a microphone and you say, "What's your name?" And then an algorithm goes to the original video of what was said, and then the survivor answers the student's question. So they are talking real time with the survivor. It is an experience. It is an incredible experience, because they get to talk to survivors. They get to ask some questions. We have this at the museum. This is actually something that's you can use in your classroom too, though. Dimensions in Testimony is something through Eyewitness. It is through the USH Shoah. You can ask them anything. I mean, they sit for hours. They sit for days and hours. And it's interesting because as you ask them questions, you get to see, oh, this question must have been asked in the morning, because they're really kind of spunky, and they're ready to answer the question. And then you're like, another question, and you're like, oh, this must have been later in the day, because they're definitely a little bit more. And if that's something that if you wanted a link to that, I can always send that to you. You can email me and I can send you that. That's something that we really encourage in classrooms. But again, you can use that at the museum too. And it's really great. People get to revisit loved ones. Another thing we have is Speak Up, Speak Now, which is, we can kind of cater it to however you want, but basically either me or my colleague Jana Lugo come into your classroom and we teach the Holocaust for you. We give a certain lesson, whatever it is that you want, and we help not only to teach about the Holocaust, but just to sort of meet all of those standards, but to give some activities that really help you to supplement the teaching that you're already doing in class. And then again, we're closed. So we can't have these, but I really, really, really encourage you to come into the museum when we reopen. It is going to be incredible. I cannot wait until these are up and out, and it's going to be a really amazing experience.
Once you're open, how long would a tour take?
So
For a class of students.
for a class of students, they're generally about 90 minutes. If we can get a speaker for you. We really, so our tour coordinator, Charles Dickens, tries yep, that's his real name. I know.
Sorry,
I know. No, it's true. He tries really hard to make sure that every tour that comes into the museum is able to get a speaker. It's not always possible, but he works really hard to make sure that, because we know that's what kids walk away with. Those are the experiences that really matter to them. Are there any other questions?
I love the online resources. I use them the last time I taught English, which was like 3 years ago. with high
Oh,
school.
wonderful, yeah. You can also, on our website, you can search our collections. We have all of these collections of so many incredible survivors and their children that have donated artifacts to our museum. And we've digitized them, and so you can search those and you can use those to kind of talk with your students and help give them just a little bit more of that kind of hands-on, even though it's not hands-on because it's online. It's still a little bit more hands-on experience. Yeah.
Just throwing it out there also, I got a teaching trunk one time with my 8th graders, and we had a great time going through it, examining all the resources. We actually were able to break up into groups because some of the books came in like sets of 5.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, well, which 5 do you want to read these? And which 5 do you want to read these? It's pretty awesome.
Oh my gosh, I almost forgot too. Not only do we have a physical teaching trunk, we also have virtual teaching trunks. So does anybody use Libby, the app, through the, it's through like the public libraries, things like that. So we have our own library through Overdrive, through Libby, that we give to you. We can create an account for every single one of your students, and we can create an account for you. And you can have your kids reading online, or you can just use it yourself if you want to read. The book in front of you is a book that happens to be in our virtual library. Which, by the way, the book in front of you, the daughter of Sebek is one of our speakers, Ruth Wade. Are there any other questions?
With the trunk, if like the book gets written on or page torn,
$800. Immediately. Made out specifically to Kristin Carroll. It happens, they're kids. We understand. Any other questions? All right, if there's no other questions, then I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jody.
If I can switch this. Let's see if I can do this. All right. Sort of worked. There we go.
I did it, I'm so excited. It's the little things that make me happy. My name is Judy Pushkin. I am the manager and one of the curriculum writers at the Tampa Bay Times newspaper and education program. If you're here, you probably got an email from me. You probably get lots of emails from me, so I apologize. But thank you for coming and joining us tonight. There's a couple of things I want to point out about what we put out on the table. The genocide piece that is in front of you is something that we did a couple of years, 2 years ago? 2 years ago. And there are 2 Holocaust survivor stories in there. One of them is in Dimensions and Testimony. She's one of the speakers for Dimensions and Testimony. So I wanted to mention that to you. And also, the book that you have in front of you, we were looking for an appropriate book for middle or high school, and this one seems to fit the bill. So if you're looking for more copies of that, I believe that they're also in one of the teaching trunks. So this is our tampabay.com/NIE is our website. I apologize in advance or in retrospect if anybody was trying to get onto the digital edition last week, because we had all kinds of problems with it. This is just a little background about me. Basically, I have been working in NIE since about 2000. In my former life and in my spare time, I'm an English teacher. So a lot of the things that you'll see in the curriculum guides are focused on, we'll have language arts standards. How many people know what NIE is? Oh, I only see a couple of hands up. Okay, I'm going to go through this really quickly for you. Basically, we're a cooperative effort between the schools and the newspaper to promote the use of newspapers in print and electronic form as educational resources. It is free of charge for you to use in your classroom. I noticed that when I was looking at the sign-in sheet, I noticed we have a lot of people from Citrus County. Yay, Citrus County. So unfortunately, we no longer deliver print copies to Citrus, but we do still deliver the digital edition. You can still sign up and get digital edition for your class, and we can also send you curriculum, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. I kind of feel bad talking about curriculum when she was just saying the museum is closed, because we have a kind of issue at the Times as well with that. So the idea of using the newspaper in your classroom is basically to get kids to read the newspaper and to get them reading every day and to see that the real world takes place outside of their school books. So the Times provides vital link to the real world for students who too often do not realize the value of their academic programs. I don't know about the rest of you, but I hear students tell me constantly they are never going to need to learn English to use after they graduate high school. And I'm here to tell you that is not true. I teach, I'm an adjunct at Hillsborough Community College, and my students tell me that they're never going to need to write after they get out of English composition, and I ask them what they're going to do, and they say they're going into law enforcement. And I say, well, good luck with not being able to write, because you are going to be writing lots of reports. So why use a newspaper? What's informational text? What is informational text? Text that informs you. It's nonfiction text. It has specific parameters about it. According to Scholastic Magazine, it is a type of nonfiction text that includes factual information, and informational text differs from other types of nonfiction in purpose, features, and format. So basically you have different formats, and if you look through the genocide piece, you're going to notice that it's broken up. There's pictures, there are activities, there are blocks of text, all that kind of thing is in the newspaper. So why should you use the newspaper if you have a textbook that's giving you history? The newspaper happens right now, that is correct. And the history is printed in the newspapers, right? That's why they're primary sources. And also secondary sources. Same thing with survivors. Why do you want a survivor to tell their story? Because you want to hear from their perspective what happened, right? This is really thin. I'm going the wrong way. See what happened? There we go. Newspapers are also secondary sources. Secondary sources are accounts that retell, analyze, or interpret events, usually at a distance of time or place. We have one of the curriculum publications that we have is about the history of chocolate, And in that publication, there are lots of different examples of primary sources, and because they're retelling it, it's a secondary source using a primary source. So this is what informational text, the various types of informational text, essays, articles, letters, images, cartoons, photographs, and advertisements. But you guys know all that kind of stuff. And you also know the importance of rhetoric. We just got through with an election cycle, so learning what a political campaign is, or learning why people word things certain ways is very important for students. So the publication that we're working on that's going to be produced at the end of this year is called Bearing Witness, an Exploration of the Holocaust Through Primary Sources. And I know you can't probably read all that because it's tiny, but I listed for you the primary sources that I use. The survivors are to the left, and then towards the middle are the second generation, and then I have a third generation. Basically, I interviewed all of these people to get their specific stories about what happened. Some of them were children at the time. Some of them were, as you can read in there, Mary was a little bit, she was a teenager at the time, whereas Tony was a little kid at the time. So all of these stories are going to be in the publication, along with the facts about, let me go back to this. There we go. I'm trying to skip so that I don't. There we go. Okay. Along with information about why the Holocaust, some of the circumstances that led to the Holocaust. Talking about anti-Semitism, talking about the Nuremberg race laws. All of that is at the beginning of it, and then the rest of it is the survivor stories. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit. So photos as primary sources is an important thing to teach in your classroom. Basically, you want to ask the students what's going on in the picture, what do they see that makes them say that, and what details do you see? This is the train car from the Holocaust Museum in St. Petersburg. What do you see?
No windows.
A box. What was that?
No windows.
No windows. What else do you see?
Page.
Yes.
Photos on the wall.
Photos on the wall, yes. So the photos on the wall are behind where the boxcar is. And then there's some details in here too. But the most important thing you would notice is there's one door, there's no windows, and then when you read the survivor stories and you hear that they were crammed into a boxcar like this with hundreds and hundreds of people.
I think I stood in that boxcar.
Did you?
I think
You
there
would-
were people in it when we were kids.
Okay. So you would, I mean, it's just, if you think about it, it's just appalling. There's no talk about their circumstances. I'm sure that they were all freaking out because they didn't have the internet for Milton, right? No air conditioner, no new food coming in, so there's no place to eat, there's no place to get water, there's no place to go to the bathroom.
No oxygen.
What was that?
Oxygen.
Yes. This is a picture of Kristallnacht. These are soldiers standing outside the building that the riots had destroyed. Why is it? What is significant about this picture? What do you notice?
They're all standing away from it, like, so that they're not seeing it.
Yes, that's true. What else do you notice?
The damage,
The damage. What kind of damage is it?
broken, torn up.
Broken doors, broken windows, broken gates, right? These are people's livelihoods that were destroyed. So one of the reasons why you use pictures, and we try to use this in all of our publications, is so that, because students relate to pictures. Where do they get their information?
Screens.
Yes, but where specifically?
Internet.
The internet or social media. So they get it from Instagram, they get it from Snapchat, they get it from TikTok. It's all about videos. It's all about looking at video, interpreting what's going on in the video. This is on the cover of the book that you have in front of you. What do you notice about these people?
They're smiling.
They're smiling. What else do we notice? They're young, they seem well dressed.
They're coming out, not going.
Yes, they're coming out, not going in. And this is, the person in the middle is the author of the book, and this is his brother. This is when they were leaving to go to England. So they were rescued from a displaced persons camp and going to England, which is why they're happy. So another thing, and we talked about this before, they talked about this before, Kristin was talking about going through the definition, so I'm not going to go through it with you again. But one of the things you want to look at when you're talking to students is talk about the social implications, the economic implications, the political implications, and the ethical implications. Wow, it is late in the day for me to say all that. We also talk about, in bearing witness, there's also information and some activities talking about what propaganda is. Again, going back to rhetoric, the importance of knowing what propaganda is and where you see it. One of the things I notice with my students is they have no idea what a newspaper article is. So if they see an advertisement that is a lot of text, a lot of times they think that that is an article. They don't understand that somebody paid for that. So it's important to know the difference between facts, opinions, and propaganda. This is one of the women that I interviewed, Viola Barris. She was in Auschwitz. This is just an example of one of the interviews in the publication. This is another survivor. She was a child at the time, as you can tell from the photo. This is the author of the book. This is a gentleman who lives in Miami who wrote a book that is free, available for you to download online as a PDF. This is Harry. This is Harry's family.
Two sisters.
His two sisters. And these are just some examples of some other things that we, some other interviews that I did. Mostly with second generation, because unfortunately there are a lot of, we don't have as many first generation as we used to. And Michael is a third generation. What does that mean? Grandchild, yes. He's also the man in charge nowadays at the Holocaust Museum, I believe is his official title. We also have a timeline. We start the timeline, I think we started, oh, I don't have that on here. We start the timeline when, before Hitler takes control, and then we go all the way up to things talking about genocide and how genocide became an international crime. So I asked you how many people knew about the newspaper and education program, and a lot of you didn't raise your hand. So this is a quick tutorial. Basically, this is our website, tampabay.com/NIE. Don't forget that. All of our materials are on here. There's a login for the e-edition. There is a place to register if you don't have an account. And then we have all of these little tools up here that have free curriculum for you to use. So the weekly lessons, we have weekly lessons that are updated every week. There are, now I'm forgetting the title of all of them. We have news videos. We have some science podcasts. And they are all available, again, once a week they update. Where it says curriculum, that's where we list all of our publications. So normally, if you have a publication like Genocide in front of you and you want a class set, what all you would do would be to email me and say, please send me a class set, and I would be happy to do that. Unfortunately, thanks to the crane in our building, I do not have access to all of our resources at this point because they are being held hostage by mold in our Tampa Bay Times office. So, but I do have some. So I do have the History of Chocolate publication. I do have the Genocide publication. I have one that's focused on called Democracy Reignited. So if you are interested in anything, if you see anything on our website that you're interested in, you can definitely still email us and we can send it to you. If you are not a newspaper and education teacher, all you have to do is click this register here, and you can sign up to get the newspaper in print, in digital format in your classroom. It's all free of charge. We have sponsors, very generous sponsors that pay for you to have that service. Sponsors like the Tampa Bay Rays. The genocide piece was produced by was supported by the Florida Humanities. So if you are interested in signing up, just click on register here and fill out the form. If you are in a new school and your school isn't listed, you can also contact me and I will be happy to send that to you. So this is my direct contact information and this is a general contact information. I am easiest to get via email because like right now I'm not sitting in front of my phone. Or Sue is sitting in front of my phone, I guess, if you try to call her. But you can email me and I'll be happy to send you anything that you need. All of our materials are available to all grades and all counties. So all you have to do is let us know what you want. This is what I was talking about by the updated weekly news features. We have a headline geography quiz. There's a vocabulary quiz, which is not showing up on here. If you are doing any kind of bell work with your students, we have used the news lessons by grade level. It is a great tool for that. It's broken up by grade level and it basically gives you a paragraph of information and has the students go in the newspaper to find examples of things. So we have some really great resources for you to use the newspaper. I'm not just saying, take the newspaper and hand it out, although some teachers do that. And we also have this front page talking points where, and I don't know if my computer is going to go to the internet, so that's why I'm not pulling it up, but front page talking points has a video, 3 discussion questions, and information about whatever the topic is that's being discussed that week. Did that make any sense?
That's on the homepage.
Completely in
This
line.
is, if you go back to our homepage and you click on weekly lessons, it's the 3rd tab. And you don't have to sign up for that, you can just access it.
Is this only available for public schools or that can be available for
Private schools, public schools, home schools. We'll help anybody. Right, Sue? This is Sue, my colleague, back here.
Hello everyone, Sue Workman, and we also have a guide. It's digital only, but it's a PDF and it's 80 ways to use the newspaper, which is really handy. So if you are interested in using a newspaper but you can't think of anything off the top of your head, page through that. I promise you, you will find an idea of how to do it.
And I didn't ask this question before. How many are high school teachers? Any middle school? Any elementary? Okay. So for middle school, for elementary school students, we also have something called, under curriculum, we have these reading cards that are called Reading Fun with Raymond, I think.
Yeah, those for little kids.
Those are for little kids, but they'll get kids into using the newspaper, being able to find headlines, being able to find titles, that sort of thing. And we do have, a lot of the materials that we have that are available for high school are also available for middle school. The publication, the Holocaust publication that we're working on is going to middle and high schools.
In January, public. So if you are a private school and you want it, you just have to contact us and we will send you a class.
And I skipped over this because you all know this, but I wanted to bring up that these are the standards that are covered in bearing bearing. These are the standards that are covered in the publication that I'm working on. If you look at the genocide piece, you'll notice that the standards are on the back page. So we try to put those there for you so that you can put them into your lesson plans. For our more recent publications, we also have the standards listed under each activity. Questions? I was trying to go fast. Did I miss anything, Sue?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So Sue has left a wonderful little survey in front of you that we would appreciate if you would fill that out before you leave today. You are welcome to take the notepads and the lanyards and the bookmarks that are on the table. If I missed you when I was handing out the book, let me know. But the book is yours. And if you want any more food, there's still a little food back there.
And if you didn't sign in on the paper checklist, make sure that you sign in, especially if your ticket was purchased by someone else, so that we can get everyone a certificate.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.